don't want to be strong like man who look pretty. I want to be strong like bitch that fight bears in the forest.
Welcome to episode 18 of Bitch vs. Bear with your lovely hosts, Amber and me, Sydney of Shieldman Trading Co. A show where we often bitch, laugh, and chat about all things fitness related to women in the LGBTQIA community. I haven't had a lot of water today. My mouth's a little dry.
You also had a very large glass of beer.
I did.
Before we recorded.
But it's mostly the water in my mouth being dry.
Sure. Okay, so this month we are focusing on the particular advantages and challenges that folks with female anatomy can face in the fitness world. Being Women's History Month, we figured this was a good month to tackle that topic.
Yes. March,
yes.
Women's History Month.
Yes.
Right.
This
Wow.
comes out on March 1st.
Time flies when you're having fun. I can't believe it's already
just
March.
flies.
Yeah, right?
Okay, so first, let's talk about the red elephant in the room.
Are we in a Dr. Seuss novel?
Yes. Menstrual cycles.
Ah!
Your favorite topic. We talk about this a lot outside the podcast.
This is true, we do, yeah.
But it's still one of those taboo topics.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is silly because half of the population menstruates.
Yes. Yeah.
So
yeah.
It's a topic that should be talked about more.
Absolutely. And it plays in it's such a unique thing in that half of the population menstruates. It is important for your fitness, but also just like general health.
Yeah.
It's like, it's a good indicator of a lot of different things that are going on. So in case you don't know, because this is not a topic, because it doesn't get talked about a lot. It doesn't, the details can really get overlooked. And so there's a lot of people out there who have uterus and ovaries and who
don't really know how they work.
Yeah, who don't really know how they work.
Because middle school health class, like I was just thinking about this. Like as we were introing this, I was like, wait a minute. I don't know if I ever even learned how it all works.
Yeah.
And what the actual cycle looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of
so
crazy. I'll share a little later something Shelby told me
no.
about. Yeah. So, but menstrual cycles are changes in hormone production and structures of the uterus and the ovaries, and it makes pregnancy possible. So like that's the baseline. Yeah. Like I think a lot of people know that.
Yeah.
But maybe not so much how the hormones play a huge impact in this production. Cycles range from 23 to 35 days and include 4 stages. So cycles, some people I think have this idea that something is wrong if their cycle happens sooner than maybe some of their friends or people that they speak to about it, or if it happens later than some of them. And it just is like everybody's body is different, and that includes this process as well.
Right.
So a good way to look at it is like going from the time of menstruation. So period, when your period is happening. For most people, that lasts somewhere between 1 and 5 days. Some can be as much as 7 and 10 days. But that's kind of the general is 1 to 5 days. And a period is when the lining of the uterus is shedding because pregnancy hasn't occurred. That is why we bleed. Like that's what's happening. And then the next stage is the follicular. I always have a hard time saying that one.
So I gave you this section to talk about.
Yeah. And that typically lasts somewhere between the day 6 through 14. Again, it can range.
Right, yeah.
And so during this time is when the levels of your estrogen, the hormone estrogen, rise, which causes the lining of the uterus to start thickening again. Another hormone, which is the follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, causes the follicles in the ovaries to grow. One of those follicles will develop a fully mature egg. So like that process, that's what's happening, is like you're making an egg.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then ovulation. So when people are trying to get pregnant, like what often gets talked about is period, menstruation, and ovulation.
Right.
But there's some things that have to happen in between.
Right. Yes, that makes sense.
So that happens typically somewhere between days 14 and 28. And it's a sudden increase in the hormone luteinizing. I don't know if I said that right. We're going to call it LH.
Great.
And that rise in that hormone causes the ovary to release the egg.
That beautiful egg it just made.
Yeah.
Off it goes into the world.
Off it goes. Goodbye. And then the luteal phase, which is 15 to 28 days. So this is when the egg is leaving the ovary and it's traveling through the fallopian tubes. A lot of us do remember those from health class, to the uterus. So it's, and this is where the hormone progesterone rises and prepares the uterus or the uterine lining for pregnancy. So like your uterus has to be ready to receive egg and like
make a nice tidy home for it.
Yeah, exactly. Make a nice tiny cozy home. So that's the whole process. That's what happens.
It all starts again.
And
then the uterus gets angry because
when the uterus sheds if you haven't had a pregnancy. Yes. Yeah. So it's just the cycle. And for a lot of folks, it starts somewhere between the ages of 12 and 14. And depending, it goes from up to like, 40, 45.
Yeah.
For some, and then we enter a lovely whole nother stage, which is menopause, which we'll go into later. It's not a topic of this conversation.
Let's not.
That is a whole nother thing.
It's a sore subject. I mean, I guess so. It's a sore subject because premenopause runs very early in my family. So like I am nearing that time already, which is like a little upsetting.
Fair.
From what I've heard, it's very unpleasant.
We'll chime back in when it starts happening. It'll be a topic for the podcast.
Don't worry, we'll be talking about it a lot, I'm sure. Okay, so now that we know like what the cycle looks like, we can talk about some advantages that that you can have for exercising or training around your menstrual cycle. Hormone fluctuation during this cycle can increase or decrease energy levels. So planning your training accordingly can be really helpful. For example, in the week after a period ends, the estrogen hormone rises quickly in preparations for ovulation, releasing its beautiful little egg that you've created. And subsequently, there can be an increase in energy levels during that time as well.
Yeah. So after ovulation, estrogen levels start to decrease rapidly and the progesterone levels rise. So this is when feeling sluggish or tired, and is also the time when you might feel more inclined to like skip those training sessions or that exercise.
Yes.
And it's a valid reason. Fair. But if you don't know that it's necessarily tied in to hormonal levels changing, you might just be thinking like, I'm overtraining.
Yeah.
And like, that's easy to do. However, during that time, it may actually be really helpful to be active to help boost your mood and give you more energy. So doing things like trying to exercise or be active earlier in the day when you have a bit more energy can be really helpful. So it's good to understand when you're training, like I might have to adjust some things based on where I am in my cycle.
Yeah.
And you might always be an afternoon worker outer, but energy levels are not so great then because of this. And so that's when you have to be like, I'm going to work out in the morning.
Fair.
Yeah.
So the glitch in this system.
The glitch in the matrix.
So if, like me, you take a hormone or birth control, like the pill, a patch, a shot, vaginal ring, I have an IUD, your energy levels are still likely to go up and down, but it may be less evident and require you to monitor your body more closely for symptoms. So like, I don't really have a period at all anymore, which makes it really hard to track my cycle. Because usually that bleeding time is where you could say, okay, I'm in this stage. And from there, you can kind of track what's coming. So it's really hard for me to kind of monitor that and be able to see what's going on.
Where I am not on a hormonal birth control, and so it is very easy for me to track those things. And I'm one of the few, I would say I'm probably outside of the norm, where I am incredibly regular and predictable. So for better or worse, it is incredibly, and it's been this way probably as long as I can remember. And the way that I always know this is about every year I get my period within a few days of Christmas. Oh, and it's been that way since I was like 15. And I'm just like, okay, cool. Nice. Awesome. That's just how I want to celebrate Christmas. It's like, yeah.
I don't know that mine was ever super regular. I started mine in like 5th grade or something. It was so young. I feel like it's never been very regular. And then I started hormonal birth control, which then it is pretty regular if you're like on the pill or something. But then once I got an IUD, which is an absolutely horrific experience, but it's great because it's good for 10 years or 7 years. It just disappeared altogether.
I'm like, okay.
I'm like, all right, great. Okay, so veering back into our topic here, how does your menstrual cycle affect your ability to exercise?
That's yes and no. So researchers haven't been able to find any difference between a menstrual cycle and the ability to exercise. That being said, they have been able, and research has shown that during like endurance events, so like if you're a marathon kind of training or marathon style, like you're just doing like longer kind of more intense sessions, or even like long sporting events, those who have already ovulated but not started their period had more difficulties during like hot and humid weather. So having a period doesn't necessarily, or a menstrual cycle doesn't affect your ability to exercise. However, it does impact your ability at certain times depending on where you are in the cycle. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I like that they specifically targeted hot and humid weather as being
the issue. I'd love to see the research of like, did they just stick people in the desert? Because I would have a hard time exercising in the desert. Or like,
was there just not much of a difference if it was like cool weather?
Yeah, it's just been, that's the like really the clearest kind of indicators have been during hot and humid weather during that very specific time.
That's so interesting.
Yep.
Body's weird. Okay, so for those that have periods that they can track, can overtraining or hard training cause period loss?
It's a complex question. It's most regularly seen in athletes, like performance athletes that are training regularly and incredibly vigorously. So
not me.
It doesn't happen very often to like what I would call like weekend warriors. And not that you only work out on the weekends, but like you work out and you train and you exercise to live a healthier, more well-rounded life. It's not your income generator. Like you're not,
Thank God.
right. Like it's not that thing. So
it would not go well.
It can, under some kind of like different circumstances, which is like maybe if you haven't been exercising regularly and you suddenly start a very intense fitness routine, you may experience some irregular periods or a stoppage entirely. More often what you'll start to see is that irregular period. When I was instructing Outward Bound, it was something that we would tell students who received periods is that, hey, your diet's about to change, your exercise level's about to change, all of those factors, your stress level is about to change. And all of those things can cause your period to be irregular. So if you are somebody who is fairly predictable and you notice this change, it is something to take note of, but don't be alarmed necessarily. So it's just, yes, it can, but the likelihood is slimmer for those of us who already train regularly. It's not a huge adjustment to something brand new. So yes and no.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Major changes always.
Yeah.
It's going to have an effect on your body.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay, so we have kind of been talking about this in a roundabout way, but tracking your periods is an effective way to maximize your fitness potential. Utilizing the data to better understand how your period affects your energy levels and your mood can really help you determine the best training times and conditions, and can even relieve that pressure and guilt about having low motivation to exercise during those downswings in your cycle. Many wearable devices have created a tracking system based on data that you can provide, which can make this tracking easier.
Yeah, my Garmin, for example, tracks my cycle based on the data that I input, and it has gotten a fairly predictable, like it's usually within about a 24-hour period that it can predict when I will start, and like and it's nice because the way they track is they'll also show you the other phases that you're in.
Oh, that's nice.
So you don't have, it does that work for you. You don't have to like memorize what phase comes after menstruation. You can be like, oh, right. Which can be helpful for people who are, trying to train for certain things, who may be trying to get pregnant. Like there's different uses for that data.
Yeah. My Fitbit will also track for me. But because my period is so erratic, like I put the information in and then it's like, oh, your cycle is 127 days long. I'm like, oh no, that's wrong.
It's very interesting.
Or it predicts that it's going to start like every other week. I don't know. It's very strange. Anyways, so that is a way to help you track your period. And we do, all that being said, we do recognize that with everything that has been going on with abortion laws and those rights being essentially stripped from a lot of people, we recognize that it can be a little scary maybe to be putting some of this private information into a potentially trackable system, right?
Yes.
So if that makes you a little uncomfortable, totally cool. Do what makes you feel comfortable. This can also be something that you maybe just like make notes about in a journal, in a planner. It doesn't have to be an explicit, I started my period today. It could be like maybe you draw
a little dot with a red coloring in it.
Red coloring, a sad face, I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever works for you. But tracking is just very useful.
Yes. It can be for a lot of different reasons. So a regular predictable period for those of us who are not on hormonal birth controls or other additional hormones that are changing things, testosterone, for example, obviously is going to have an impact. You are not going to be receiving your period if you are in transition and you have started testosterone. You will have the equipment, but ideally, like the testosterone is adjusting everything and you're no longer receiving a period.
Right.
But for those of us who are not on those things, a regular predictable period is an indicator of good health. Yeah. It is actually one of the best indicators. Actually, period problems can lead to more serious health problems down the line for a lot of folks who have period issues. Bone density becomes an issue down the line. So you talk about, there's a lot of people who have early menopause who then also have subsequent bone density issues. And so that there's a clear indicator between that. So it is such a good indicator. And so if you are having period irregularities or issues, or all of a sudden Pain intensifies when you didn't used to have pain. As we age, more pain is common,
That's fair.
and those kinds of things. But if it's kind of like a drastic change from what it has been, you should try and talk to a trusted healthcare professional. And other symptoms might include things like a heavier bleeding than normal, or migraines, the onset of migraines. I think it's like 1 in 10 experience menstrual migraines, which I don't have experience with, but I know a lot of friends who do, and it can be really intense, and it's kind of awful. That's why a lot of people take, is it Midol? It's a pain reliever. It's got caffeine, which helps with migraines. Like that's one of those over-the-counter things that gets prescribed often because it is such a frequent kind of symptom of periods and menstrual cycles. Yay! All the fun things.
I love your phrasing of receiving your period. Like it's a gift somebody's giving you.
It's a gift. It is a gift, but it's one a lot of us would like to give back. I think it would be a really unique experience for scientists to work on if you are completely sure. And it wouldn't impact our health. That's the thing, is like for many of us, these ovaries, uterus, all of that is an important hormone regulator, and when they don't function right, other things don't function right. And they haven't come up with a good way of like, hey, you don't want to have children, and you don't want these working parts.
I don't need this system.
I don't need this system, or for whatever reason. But when you start removing parts and things like that, it messes with a whole lot of other things. And it's such an interesting, like they are very much an integral part of like health and wellness.
It's really unfortunate.
It is, right? Like,
because they're not parts that I want anymore.
Right? It, like, you know, we're definitely designed, and there are some advantages. Like our pain threshold is so much higher because of these parts. Like we can definitely have a lot more pain than some of our counterparts with different working anatomy. And it's
I think we talked about that with Allison. Like I don't remember if I left it in the episode or not, but we talked about like this meme that I had seen of like when men go in to get procedures done.
Yes.
They're given like painkillers and like heavy painkillers.
Yeah.
Not just over the counter aspirin.
Yeah.
And like snacks and coddled. And like I've gone in for 2 IUDs. Neither I received anything more than like 800 milligrams of ibuprofen.
Yeah.
And I almost passed out on both of them. The pain was so extreme.
Yeah.
And they're just like, boop. Oh, nope, didn't go in correctly. Yank it back out and try again.
Oh,
it's terrible.
Have you seen like on the internet, essentially there was the going around for a while, like hooking up like electroshock and to mimic menstrual cramps to men. And
it is my favorite genre of. It is so funny.
It is.
They're so dramatic. Oh my God.
But the thing is, like, their pain threshold is so much lower than ours. And
it's
that's
not that bad.
It's by design. I mean, for them, their perception probably is much worse because like we are designed to undergo a lot of trauma in that area where they are not.
Weaker sex, my ass.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So
anyways,
all of that being said, regular and predictable periods are an indicator of good health. And if you are struggling with anything, it's important to talk to a healthcare professional because it can definitely impact, like, especially like long term.
Yeah. Okay, so this is just the first aspect of feminatomy that we want to talk about. So make sure to keep joining us next week and for the rest of the month and, forever. as we explore more challenges and advantages
Yes.
for folks with female anatomy.
Yeah. We do have advantages. I promise we'll get into them. This episode kind of made it sound like we don't have a lot of advantages.
I mean, during the higher energy portions of the cycle, like, go for it.
Yeah.
But, you know, we also have a lot more that we have to deal with.
Yeah.
So, yeah, follow, like us, rate us, go comment, and go check out the Armory for new swag. I am wearing another one of our new shirts today. They're pretty awesome, super comfy.
I love my long sleeve shirt. And if you haven't seen the reel with me in my long sleeve shirt, you should go check
it's so
it out.
funny. You should. So yeah, you should go get your own. And post a reel about it.
Yes, post a reel about it.